The Tower of London, rising against the skyline of London, is one of England's most iconic landmarks. Yet beyond its majestic walls lies a history steeped in blood, a place where kings once ruled, prisoners begged for mercy, and executioners sharpened their blades. Built to intimidate and to protect, the tower evolved over the centuries into a symbol of fear, a place where those who entered often faced a grim fate. Its walls have witnessed betrayal, endured torture, and echoed with the agony of countless condemned souls. This is no ordinary historical monument. It is a fortress of death. The Tower of London was built in 1078 by William the Conqueror, a stronghold meant to project the power of the Norman monarchy. But it soon became more than a military fortification. By the end of the 12th century, it served as a royal prison, reserved for the enemies of the crown. In 1078, William the Conqueror ordered the construction of a stone fortress on the banks of the Thames. The White Tower, massive and merciless, was designed to dominate, a relentless beacon of Norman power. For the people of London, its silhouette was not a sign of protection, but of oppression. What began as a military stronghold evolved into a complex structure, a royal palace, an armory, and eventually, a prison. The tower transformed from a shield into a cage. Over the centuries, the Tower of London became a place to imprison the enemies of the crown. Not only criminals, but nobles, clergy, and even royal family members found themselves behind its cold walls. Many never saw the light of day again. The tower earned a reputation that preceded it. Its name alone was enough to instill fear. The threat of imprisonment within its walls was often more powerful than any verdict. For those who entered the tower seldom returned. It became a place of silence and shadow, a labyrinth of stone corridors where whispered confessions, cries of despair, and the chilling stillness of the end all converged. What was once meant as a symbol of authority became an icon of dread, a fortress of fear. To be sent to the tower was not merely a sentence. It was a descent into silence, isolation, and uncertainty. The Tower of London, with its thick stone walls and iron gates, became a final destination for many who dared to defy the crown. Its prisoners ranged from fallen nobles to political rebels, from queens to conspirators. Some had spoken out of turn. Others were caught in the crossfire of power struggles. All shared the same fate, a slow unraveling behind the tower's impenetrable facade. Anne Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII, was imprisoned here before her execution. Accused of adultery and treason, she waited in the Queen's house, a prison cloaked in dignity, yet no less cruel in its promise of death. Her grace under pressure became legendary. Lady Jane Grey, the 9 Days Queen, was only 16 when she was confined within the tower's walls. A pawn in a political game she never chose to play, Jane faced her fate with quiet strength and sorrowful acceptance. Others, like Guy Fawkes, were dragged in chains through Traitor's Gate. Suspected of plotting against the state, he endured torture, interrogation, and ultimately a brutal sentence, a journey from rebellion to ruin. Inside the tower, time stretched endlessly. Prisoners wrote final letters, clung to fading hopes of pardon, or prepared for the inevitable. Some prayed for mercy, others welcomed death. Few escaped its grasp. Fewer still were spared. For most, the tower's embrace was cold, final, and absolute, a place where identity faded and fate was sealed. In the shadow of the tower, sentences were carried out with chilling precision. Execution was not merely an end, it was a spectacle, a demonstration of power, a warning to the masses, and an agonizing ordeal for the condemned. The most common method within the tower's walls was beheading. On the scaffold, men and women knelt, their heads resting on a wooden block, awaiting the sharp steel of the axe. One clean strike promised a swift death, but when the executioner faltered, it became a bloody, drawn-out horror. Anne Boleyn, as queen, was granted the rare dignity of a French swordsman. Others, like Margaret Pole, suffered a tragic and clumsy end at the hands of an inexperienced executioner who needed multiple blows to complete the act. For those charged with high treason, an even darker fate awaited: hanging, drawing, and quartering. This method was deliberately slow, designed to break both body and spirit. The condemned was first hanged, not to death, but near it. While still alive, they were cut down, their abdomen opened, and their entrails removed and burned before their very eyes. Finally, the body was quartered, its limbs sent to distant corners of the kingdom as a brutal warning. Guy Fawkes, the infamous conspirator behind the gunpowder plot, was sentenced to this fate. Yet in a final act of defiance, he leapt from the scaffold, breaking his neck and sparing himself the full horror that awaited. Execution was never just about justice. It was ritual, steeped in blood, fear, and symbolism. And the Tower was its altar. Not every death in the Tower of London came by the sword. Many perished slowly, broken by pain, fear, and the relentless cruelty of torture. Behind closed doors, far from public view, the human will was tested in unimaginable ways. The Tower held a grim arsenal of torture devices, each designed with a single purpose: to break resistance. One of the most feared was the Scavenger's Daughter, a metal frame that compressed the prisoner's body into an unnatural position. Knees forced against the chest, head bowed, ribs cracking under pressure. It was a slow suffocation, both physical and mental. Even more infamous was the rack, a deceptively simple device that stretched limbs to their limits. Each turn of the wheel wrenched joints apart, tore muscles, and shattered bones. Under such agony, many confessed, whether guilty or not. Truth became irrelevant beneath the weight of unbearable suffering. Thumb screws, iron shackles, and manacles, smaller tools but equally ruthless. Torture was not an accident. It was policy, a means of spreading fear, extracting confessions, or simply asserting power. One of its most well-known victims was Edmund Campion, a Jesuit priest who refused to renounce his faith. Stretched on the rack until his body nearly gave way, he never betrayed his beliefs. His endurance turned him into a martyr, his pain a lasting symbol of human defiance. In the Tower, torture meant more than just pain. It was a weapon, a message, an echo of a time when mercy was weakness and silence could be deadly. In the shadow of the scaffold stood a man who preferred to remain nameless. The executioner, keeper of the blade, enforcer of judgment, and embodiment of death. His task was clear, but his existence complex. He was both necessary and reviled. Executioners were not monsters, nor were they heroes. Their work was dirty, precise, and fraught with risk. One mistake, a trembling hand or a dull blade, could turn a swift death into a gruesome ordeal. An executioner had to be skilled, steady, and merciless. A clean strike was the only mercy he could offer the condemned. Yet there was little honor in the role. Executioners were shunned, feared, and sometimes cursed. Their faces remained hidden behind masks, not from shame, but for protection. To the public, they were the hand of the king. To the bereaved, they were the weapon of injustice. Some executions took place in public squares, watched by thousands. Others, especially those of the highborn, were conducted in silence within Tower Green. There, in the secluded garden, the executioner took the heads of queens, princesses, and nobles with the same restless precision. But even the executioner was not infallible. When he failed, he became a figure of hatred. Every botched blow was a reminder of the inhumanity of his role. His axes, swords, and ropes were meticulously maintained, not with pride, but with grim necessity. The executioner was no judge. He did not decide. He merely delivered. Yet in his hands lay the final experience of the condemned: pain, mercy, or something far more terrifying in between. Some deaths are forgotten, others unforgettable. In the long and bloody history of the Tower of London, there were moments when death was not merely a punishment, but a symbol. These executions, cloaked in tragedy and power, would echo through the centuries. Anne Boleyn, second wife of King Henry VIII, was once the woman who drove a king to revolution. Her wit and intelligence made her queen, but her failure to produce a male heir sealed her fate. In May 1536, she was charged with adultery, incest, and treason. Her trial was a sham, her guilt predetermined, yet she stood upon the scaffold with uncommon calm. In a rare gesture of mercy, she was granted a French swordsman instead of the axe. One swift stroke, and the life of a queen ended in silence. Lady Jane Grey, just 16 years old, was crowned queen in a desperate bid for power. Her reign lasted only 9 days. When Bloody Mary reclaimed her rightful place on the throne, Jane became a pawn in a game she never chose. In February 1554, she was led to Tower Green. Young, devout, and with a dignity far beyond her years, she died a martyr to an ambition that was never her own. Sir Thomas More, statesman and scholar, chose conscience over obedience. When Henry VIII declared himself head of the Church of England, More refused to acknowledge it. His silence was deemed treason. In July 1535, he climbed the scaffold with conviction in his voice and peace in his heart. His execution made him a symbol of unwavering moral strength. Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, was old and innocent, but her bloodline, her family ties, and her loyalty to the Catholic faith made her dangerous. In 1541, she was sentenced without a fair trial. When she refused to lay her head upon the block, the inexperienced executioner struck blindly. It took multiple blows. Her death was not justice. It was butchery. These lives, ended within the tower's stone embrace, were more than historical footnotes. They were moments where power clashed with principle, honor with politics, faith with fear. And in death, they found what life denied them: eternal remembrance. Behind the imposing walls of the Tower of London, many prisoners began an invisible battle. No swords, no scaffolds, only silence, cold, and the slow erosion of hope. For those who didn't leave through the executioner's hand, another fate awaited: life behind the bars. The cells ranged from bare stone holes to royal chambers, depending on rank and status. But even comfort was a lie. No luxury could mask the truth. That one's freedom was gone, surrendered to the whims of power. Each day was a repetition of waiting for news, for questioning, for mercy, or for death. The walls listened to prayers and screams, to whispers and despair. Some prisoners wrote letters, pleas to family or the king. Others etched their names, poems, or last words into the stone, permanent scars on the tower's heart. Some endured through faith or defiance. Others slowly broke beneath the weight of uncertainty. Sir Walter Raleigh, locked for years in the Bloody Tower, spent his days writing and studying. His words, carved in captivity, outlived the man who wrote them. And yet, there were also stories of escape, of courage and cunning, attempts that sometimes failed, sometimes succeeded, but always spoke to the unbreakable human spirit. Life in the tower was not just punishment of the body, it was torment of the mind, a daily reminder that freedom had become a memory, and in that darkness, some found strength, while others found their end. When the sun sets and the shadows stretch long across the grounds, the Tower of London takes on another face. Its cold stone no longer merely breathes history, but something deeper, something unseen. For though the blood has long since dried from the scaffold, the voices of the dead have never truly gone silent. Over the centuries, guards, visitors, and historians have reported unexplained phenomena. Whispers in empty halls, icy gusts in sealed chambers, and the sudden, unmistakable feeling of being watched. The most famous ghost is that of Anne Boleyn. Her headless spirit is said to still wander the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where her remains were laid to rest. Some claim to have seen her figure, elegant, yet haunting, her hands cradling an invisible head. In the Bloody Tower, The ghosts of the princes in the tower, Edward V and his brother Richard, are said to linger. Children's laughter, soft footsteps, and, at times, the sound of weeping, echoes of an ancient mystery that remains unsolved. Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, is believed to scream through the gardens of Tower Green, her spirit condemned to relive her brutal death over and over again. And on misty mornings, whispers tell of a white figure gliding across the walls, always just out of reach of the light. Not all tales are ancient. Even in the 20th century, soldiers and visitors have reported strange occurrences, doors opening on their own, cold hands brushing past from nowhere, lights flickering without cause. The Tower of London is not merely a place of stone and history. It is a living archive of sorrow, vengeance, and restless souls, where the past refuses to die, and the dead may be closer than we think. For centuries, death at the Tower of London was a public spectacle, a cruel ritual that drew crowds as much as it inspired fear. Executions were not only punishment, but performance. Every fallen head, every silent scream, was meant to reaffirm the authority of the crown. But the world changed, and with it, the understanding of justice. By the 19th century, public opinion began to shift. What was once seen as necessary and fearsome began to be viewed as barbaric. People questioned the morality of public executions. The brutality, the blood, the suffering, the children watching from the front row became unbearable for a society that longed to appear more humane. In 1868, public executions were officially abolished in England. The scaffolds vanished from the streets. Death sentences would now be carried out behind closed doors, quietly, without cheering crowds. The Tower of London, once the stage for hundreds of executions, grew still, and yet death returned one final time. During World War II, in 1941, the German spy Joseph Jacobs was executed within the tower's walls. He was shot by firing squad, the last person to lose his life within the fortress. After that, the executioner's blade fell silent forever. Today, visitors stand in the shadow of Tower Green, where the axe once rose. The echoes remain, but the weapons are buried. What endures is a history that speaks, not in screams, but in whispers of warning, remembrance, and regret. The Tower of London stands not merely as a structure of stone and steel, but as a witness, a silent, centuries-old observer of power and abuse, of rise and ruin, of justice and raw injustice. Its walls have echoed with royal celebrations and wept with the cries of the condemned. Every stone bears the weight of stories, of kings who secured their thrones through blood, of queens who lost their heads to politics, of rebels, martyrs, and nameless souls who never made the history books, but forever dwell in its shadow. The tower is not a museum of the past. It is living memory. It reminds us of the price of power, of the cruelty committed in the name of order, and of the resilience of those who endured until the end. Today, visitors walk its corridors, look down upon Tower Green, and gaze upward at the bloody tower. They listen to guides, read plaques, but the true story lies in the silence between the stones, in the chill of a cell's draft, in the footsteps that never returned home. The Tower of London is no monument of glory. It is a cautionary tale, a place where history and pain meet, and where the echoes of the past still whisper to those willing to hear.